Good evening and welcome to the October 10th Garrett Park Town Council meeting. I call this meeting to order. Looks like we've got 4 of our 5 council members, but we'll get started. The time is 7:31. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Are there any requests to make changes or modifications? Okay, without objection, we're going to approve those, the agenda. Next item is approval of minutes. We have before us the September 12th Town Council meeting minutes. Are there any changes, deletions, modifications, anything of that nature?
Yes, I've got something.
Phil, I'm having trouble hearing you.
How about now? Can you hear me any better?
It's a little bit better.
So I do have one change or modification. I had asked during the debate about the classification, or it was basically regarding the ordinance for code provision enforcement, that we also look at having a town council committee, or town council basically be the backstop, or this place that somebody could go to if they don't like or have objections to whatever the mayor or possibly town manager may have accused them of.
Okay. Got that, Barb?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other changes?
Yeah, Joanna, if I may, there were a number of questions and inquiries that came up. None of those are listed. So is there a desire to list every question or thought that someone had during that discussion, just for the sake of consistency? Or not? That's why there was just a generic comment about a number of items that you all asked to be researched or to be brought back when you actually consider the ordinance again.
Well, I was thinking that because what we are doing tonight is just talking about it as a discussion, that I would assume that will be addressed, but
yeah, that's kind of, yeah, that's why I'm just asking if there any other desired changes in the minutes, because there was just a general statement that I had included about deferring introduction pending receipt of additional information. So there were a number of questions and comments that came from several members of the council. So I just wasn't sure if you wanted it amended to include what Phil asked for. Is there also a desire to amend it for what other people might have said during that discussion?
With all due respect, I noticed that at least on one of the things, it mentioned some things that Councilmember Bennett was interested in. So while I don't have a problem with that, I just want to bring that up.
Phil, your audio is very muffled and really out of balance with the rest of us, I think.
Okay, I just said, but
right.
I know that other council members had brought things up, but I can bring that up later on.
Barb, it sounds like there's a desire to have those questions listed in the minutes from last month's meeting.
Do you want to defer approving the minutes this evening then and just bring this back next month so everyone has a chance to see that language?
Sure. Okay, all right. So we will set aside the minutes from the September meeting. Time is 7:36 and we come to presentations by residents. I am going to ask that those presentations be only of things that are not otherwise listed in the agenda. If someone has something they'd like to say about something that is in the agenda, I would be happy to call on you at that at that point in the meeting so that we can not ask questions and answer questions now before we've had the chance to answer the questions that we're planning to do. So rather than jump the gun. That being said, are there any presentations by residents for things not on the agenda? I don't see any hands raised, so we'll move on. I asked that the town manager's report be bumped up to earlier in the meeting because just kind of as a general thing, Barb provides a lot of information during her reports, and especially in the sense that it gives us updates of what the town staff has been working on. I wanted to make sure that those things were presented at a time and given the sort of appropriate attention so they don't get swallowed up and fall by the wayside at the end. So so next on the agenda, time is 7:37, we have Barb Matthews with Town Manager's Report.
Thank you, Joanna. Kind of start with the financial report. Included in my report is the financial report for the month of September, as I noted in the memo included in the agenda packet. We're still fairly early in the fiscal year. We're only about 3 months in, so there's really limited items of note at this point in the fiscal year. I did want to call to your attention in account 5.4 other receipts on the revenue side. The balance in that account does reflect the $12,000 payment we received from Mrs. Yendel's representative for removing the contents of the single-family home on Kenilworth Avenue. That same line item also reflects reimbursements that we're continuing to receive from the state for COVID-related expenses that are incurred by the town. Before I move on, is there any question about the financial report? Anyone? Okay, just a couple things kind of to update you all. One is the town hall renovation. As you all know, you had a special town council meeting on August 31st and agreed on the scope of work to be included in a request for proposals for architectural services. This is an initial contract. You're still obviously exploring what you want to include in the actual renovation project. So I am spending some time this week on the bid specifications, actually have started those and hope to have something to you within the next couple of weeks, but certainly no later than your next town council meeting. We are also doing some work in conjunction, particularly with Councilmember Max, discussing various grant programs that we might be able to access as possible funding sources for the town hall renovation project. I would say in general, most grant programs do require a more defined scope of work than we have existing at this time. So that will be something that will probably become more viable once we've actually decided on the scope of work. Did want to share with you that on September 27th, our Assistant Town Manager, Caleb Bucher, and I met with Delegate Al Carr to discuss the legislative bond bill initiative process. These are essentially state grants for capital projects. One of the requirements that you do have to have a legislative sponsor. In discussing this matter with Delegate Carr, he did think that where we are in the scope of the renovation project, and at least in his assessment, it's not necessarily problematic in terms of pursuing a bond bill in the state's FY 2024 budget. As I think everyone likely knows, Delegate Carr is scheduled to leave office in a couple months. So I have reached out to the office of Delegate Jared Solomon about possibly sponsoring a legislative bond bill initiative on behalf of the town. And I have a meeting with him next week. So I'll be sending him some background information about town hall. The last item that I wanted to mention about town hall is when you had your meeting on August 31st, you requested that I reach out to the County Historical Preservation Commission, basically just to get an informal read on how they might respond to any request on the part of the town to relocate town hall. In a nutshell, what I was advised by the county HPC staffer with whom I spoke is that it is highly unlikely that the County Historic Preservation Commission would approve moving town hall to another location. The county HPC staffer also shared that the commission would likely want to understand in considering any historic area work permit, which is what would be entailed, the complete history and thought process behind the town's request or interest in moving the building. They would want to know if there was any immediate threat to its current location from either, for example, a master planned roadway, flooding, or other hazardous condition. Those are the typical reasons why the County Historic Preservation Commission would approve the relocation of any historic structure. We would likely also be asked why all other options were considered and rejected. So I guess in a nutshell, what was conveyed to me is that their approval of moving any historic structure would be viewed as an option of last resort after all other possible course of actions had been considered. So be happy to answer any questions, but that is the informal feedback that I received from the County Historic Preservation Commission staff member with whom I spoke. Any questions?
Can I say, I'm not surprised they would say that without any kind of a plan. There's nothing else they really could say. So it was all from the get-go, it was kind of a speculative thing to see if we could really vision what would be in a town hall, kind of almost imagine if we didn't have one. Even before that, it started from the fact that we only had like over 100K in our budget. So kept getting these requests to, can you fix town hall?
Right.
And I keep even hearing things about like the scope that was done like 6-7 years ago, like the right scopes for a living. It was a very poor scope. There's a lot of things in there that are just really, really bad practice being recommended just for handling the historic shell like that in general. So it's not even a good basis point to go on. But there's no way you could, the county historic or any historic agency is going to just say, just move buildings willy-nilly. And, they usually do want to have something like that where the structure or the site is endangered to be able to do it, but it doesn't mean that's always that case. It would have to be a really strong case to do it. And, we know that this is not like a case where there's nothing standing in the way of it, whether it's noise or, just sentimental reasons or a lot of different reasons. So I mean, I just feel like it's a shame, like so much has been brought of this thing for, it was basically a lot of pressure to not even talk about what might be good for the town in a town hall in kind of general versus, just where it is. Like if we didn't have a town hall, we would never consider putting it where it is. It doesn't mean it's the end of the world or it's terrible where it is, but it's just really kind of a shame. Like it's so much effort. I've put in over probably about $10,000 worth of professional level of my time on this thing, and so much effort is being put into not even having a discussion of something that would be in the low 4 figures and would be useful for us to kind of know like what would be nice if the town hall could do D, E, and F instead of just A, B, and C. Maybe we find that really it's just best to just live with it doing A, B, and C where it is. But it's just I've never seen so much reaction on something like this like I do at Garrett Park, and I kind of knew that all going in, but it's just dealing with these kind of projects in so many other places. I've just never seen anything like it.
The meeting started.
Yeah.
Any other council members want to chime in on this?
So I have a question. Are we going to then?
The volume is very low for some reason. I don't know why.
Are we going to remove the requirement to study moving town hall from the RFP, or are we going to leave it there given the information we just received?
That is a question for council members. I think that I echo Stephen's point that it's kind of frustrating and unfortunate to shut down conversations and shut down ideas before they've even been presented or considered. But I don't have a vote on this, so that's my piece. That's up to council members.
It's amazed me how much misinformation has been spreading around about this thing with just cost estimates and the time. I mean, it's really like a very low dollar effort. Like like I explained in August 31st meeting, which I think was, in my opinion, a little bit of a mistake on our part. We could have had this RFP, just include that, and had that as a good information piece, really kind of honestly and more openly address like programming questions and kind of think about it outside of the box. But I don't know. I have a feeling it's just a tough thing in this town to kind of think different than what we're used to. And it's a couple days effort to like do a sketch and a couple plans. Like I've done it before on projects where we were up against not exactly this situation, but similar, where it was kind of like there was a huge budget cap and like how could we ever even get the budget that it seems like it needs to do what the community wants, and think about something that's outside of the box that really kind of fuels your thinking, even if you don't do what's literally in that outside the box effort. I did them, sometimes in an afternoon because we were just like jamming it in as a fourth effort, and then you spend a couple hours doing a cost estimate that's really just just really high level round numbers of things. So I don't know, I guess I've kind of said my piece, but the whole thing's been frustrating to me. So
Jerry Lee or Donna or Phil, would any of you want to weigh in?
Thank you. Is the sound okay before I continue? No?
It's pretty low.
How about now? A bit better?
A little bit.
Okay, I'll speak loudly then. I was going to just say that I am saddened by Councilmember Petchkovsky's unhappiness or like chagrin to the whole entire process. I don't think that was probably the intent of the larger group. So I would be happy to hear it. I think it's maybe because there's not enough detail and a misunderstanding as to what was being proposed. So either if we're all on the same page, go back, take a half hour of detail of what that means and go from there, or don't put it in the RFA at all. But like I said, I have issues with people not being understood, and I really think it's important that we are, especially in this town where we can move forward. So if possible, perhaps, I don't know, rethinking how we present this so that people understand it better, and that misunderstanding and misconception isn't further promoted. It may change minds, it may not change minds, but at least there would be that satisfaction. That's my thought.
So I think that the concern that there's not enough information out there is valid, in part because there's no information out there. All we have asked is for the opportunity to ask for someone to think about what it would be. There is no plan, there is no preconceived notion about what an alternate site would be. There are ideas floating around, but there's no idea that we're trying to float. It is rather the idea of floating ideas, if that makes sense. And for all the folks who have chimed in and spoken vehemently about wanting to oppose this looking at options, I've heard from people who are of the opposite ilk who say, probably don't want to move it. We kind of like where it is. We think it's fine, but there's no harm in finding out how much it would cost to look at it. There's no harm in thinking about new and different ways and what and how the town could be served differently or better. So I just want to remind, the voices that we hear loudest aren't the only voices, and we're not spending any money at this point. It's just asking what it would cost to have someone think about it.
My
agree.
thing was not even about the cost of moving. It was the cost of thinking about, or the benefit of thinking about like what might be in a town hall if we didn't have one too. Like a, more community inclusion, more things to go there for than just, right now it's really can only function as, you can have a morning event and a afternoon or an evening event, maybe 2 in a day at most. Most days it's really just one. It kind of works just fine like it is. I don't even really want to move it per se, but I just wanted to have that open conversation to find out like what are we leaving on the table as a town, and if we think there's something that's a benefit, maybe it's done with moving town hall. Maybe people might be surprised. Maybe it's done another way, totally different way in the future. But just never seen anything like this where it's so much fight to not even think about something. It would be a 2-year process at least. So
Jim, I see your hand raised there, Jim.
Yeah,
I
sorry,
want to
Jen.
make sure that we get to council members first.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I think Donna was trying to go back.
I hear what you're saying, Stephen, and I think what I hear is perhaps it's two different things that we're trying to address. One, the maximization of town hall, what that could look like, where it could look like, etc. And then also renovations. And they don't necessarily have to be at the same time, perhaps, is what I'm thinking. Some renovations to town hall are necessary and could be conducted in the near future. And at the same time, we have that discussion that you're talking about, because that's not a light discussion to have. But before any of that happens, we have to also rectify the information that Barb is giving us from the historic committee, saying this is not going to be approved unless you have really good reasons. And without that, I think unless we get that understanding that there is a bit of a chance, then the discussion makes sense. But if there's absolutely zero sense, there's nothing to talk about as far as I'm concerned. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions? Am I clear?
Yeah, it definitely, it's totally expected by me going in that you would have to make a super strong case to do that. And I've been presenting to historic boards for decades now. So
Do we have
you can't just go and say you're just going to do it just because maybe it's more convenient or we might make more money with it somewhere else. Like no organization really can do that. But usually it's even some of the projects I worked on before, they had awards for Save America's Treasure. So it's a lot of times it is really, that's the basis of it. It's like saving something, and it's not like it's endangered over there, but it's also not. It's not really in any major emergency mode over there either. The roof is tight, the siding has been fixed up, and we've been using it the way it has been for decades now. So I don't think we're losing a lot of events based on I'm not going there because the toilet's 20 years old, or because the rug is not brand new, or it's not stylish. It's so I think it's like if we didn't have that discussion on August 31st, well, I'm all for, and other council members have heard me say this many times over the years, I'm all for really being transparent with things and having things out in open meetings. And I didn't like some things that had been done in the past. That was one where we may have hurt ourselves, because we could have easily kind of had all that information, all that programming analysis in there, food for thought, and then just kind of see. It might be that it tops out that 20% of towns says, oh, that's wonderful, but the other 60% say no, and then the other 20 I'm not mentioning just don't pay attention to anything. So it's always like a difficult thing, but it's like now it's just so much energy
I
been
think
put into.
what I'd like to, I think what I'd like to do is as it stands now, what the directive to Barb is including in the RFP a piece about what it would cost to study moving the town hall. And so if that's no longer what the council wants, then I think that's the piece that we, if you don't even want to talk about it anymore, if you don't even want to thinking about it, then let's take it out. But if it's not, if you guys want to reverse what you decided at the August 31st, then that's what it is. So I think I'd rather sort of be action based on this and cut off the cut off the conversation if there's not council support still in place.
Might
Well, that's
suggest
what I'm
maybe
saying.
there's
I
some,
think we can do both. We can do, you know, both. Cut it out of the RFP, but not necessarily throw it out the window completely. I think it's a valid thought process and an approach. But everything that we do to the town hall, I don't think would prevent it from being moved if that was what ended up being happening, what have you. It's just a thought, like I said.
might even be a middle ground. I think at this point, like one of the most important things about it would be to really openly assess that program. I don't know if I'm explaining that well, but like usually a program is something where you're trying to figure out what the function and all the spaces of a building are that may not even exist yet. So a lot of times on this kind of a study, you'll do that in parallel to looking at the existing asset you have. And then after you have both, you kind of compare and contrast. You find out that does everything that you feel like would be important to have, does it fit in the asset you have? And if not, do you say maybe we need to do an addition, maybe we need to build under, maybe we need to build out the back or the side or up or whatever, or maybe this wasn't a little bit of a more extreme case, like considering what if you even just picked up the the little historic part of it and move that across town, because it would cost less to move it and replat the land than it would the sell cost of the house. But it's like if there's not a lot of people in town that are really behind that idea, then it's probably not, that important. Is what would be important, I think, is to find out what kind of things might be in a town hall and then figure out, can we make them there? Maybe it's less important. If we can't really make them work there, maybe we do them in the future, or, we say, well, we'd like to have it, but not enough that we'd want to move, the 1,300 square foot historic structure.
Steve, I want to, what is it, fish or cut bait, whatever it is. I mean, if there's if there aren't 3 council members who are interested in leaving this in the RFP, I'd like to go ahead and get that removed, and we can move on. I want to point out something Larry Roberts wrote in the chat about what the county historic commission said is true. There's also a public good exception in county regulations about historic buildings being moved. So, for what that's worth. Geraldine, Phil, would either of you like to weigh in on whether you'd like to keep the RFP instructions to Barb the same or change them?
I don't have a strong feeling. I feel like Stephen was offering sort of a middle ground there to just make sure that we're considering all the possible uses we might want to have for town hall as part of the process. That seems to make a lot of sense to me.
As I understand, basically, we think we'll get something useful out of the study, whatever that might be, and that may help us later on as we work on refining what it is that we plan on doing with the structure. So I guess in that respect, I'm fine with leaving it where it is.
Phil, I like how you phrased that. I appreciate that. Donna, are you okay with leaving it in and punting until we have more information, or until we get bids back and see where we are then?
Just my last final question before I'm leaning toward agreeing with that. My only final question is, would it delay anything if that was part of the RFP? I think I know the answer, but I want to ask it.
Barb?
No, I mean, I think it's just another section to write. I had reached out to Steve, and he probably hasn't even seen the email yet, that I might need some assistance from him in drafting that part of it, but I don't think it's going to unduly slow anything down, no.
Okay.
Okay, so council members, you've said what you wanted to say. Jim, you had a question or had something you wanted to say a little bit ago.
Yeah, thank you, Joanna. So I'm all for conversation, but a monologue is not a conversation. And I think a month ago, virtually nobody in town had any idea that this was being considered, moving town hall to the other side of town.
Yes, I want to stop you there. We're not thinking about moving town hall. We're thinking about it. That's a different thing. We're thinking about having a conversation about whether we want to think about it. And I keep kind of saying it like that, and maybe I'm not saying it in a way that's understandable, but it's not that we're thinking about moving it. We're thinking about trying to have a conversation about it.
It's really a couple days of study that may go, or maybe likely that never leaves that report. It's a very small thing. It's a whole different thing. I think there's a misperception that the idea is that it's already been decided, it's going to be moved, and there's no stopping that train. It's going to be moved, and it's just,
And I'll tell you why there's that perception,
that's
Stephen,
not the case.
because a month ago, nobody even knew this was being thought about. And yes, it's in the 89-page document on page 68 or something. There's one line about it, but it sort of was sprung on people. And I'll point out that there are 3 residents on Waverly and Rokeby who woke up one morning a couple years ago and had a streetery in their front yard. And nobody had talked to them about it. Nobody had asked them about it. Nobody even told them it was happening. And they feel like, oh, here we go again. They're going to move town hall literally to my side yard. And nobody has even told me that this is a possibility. And so, yeah, people are reacting to that. And I think if you want less reaction to that, you need to put out a lot more information in a lot more ways, instead of being like on the listserv a few weeks ago, 4 people asked, where are you thinking about moving it on the north side of town? And no one responded. And Stephen, I emailed you directly with that question and you did not reply to me. So you want less reaction, give us more information.
Sorry, I missed your email. I just must have missed it in the flow. But for me, it's really tough with the listserv because I feel like if we respond to anything, it's a never ending thing. I dealt with that with SRTS. No matter what they said.
And why do we have a town-sponsored listserv? If our council members and our government are not going to respond to questions on the town-sponsored listserv, why do we have a town-sponsored listserv?
I was told years ago when it started that it was supposed to not be for that. It was supposed to not sideline kind of like what's the normal town government flow. And I'm sorry, I mean it's a catch-22, I think, for a lot of us in council, because you could go and ask all the people around anything and they're going to be against it. Like anything that gets discussed in this town, there's automatically going to be people against it. And then that whole idea that was pitched on like just as a what if in 2018 when I did a long presentation, like 30-40 people came, a lot of people did surveys, did it again 2021. So it's kind of, I'm not sure how much more you can do except for going door to door to people.
You can answer a question on the listserv from 4 different residents. You can respond to an email directly from a resident who says, where are you thinking about moving it to? I mean, you guys, you've really dropped the ball on this. And I've talked to a lot of neighbors about this, and I'm giving you feedback that you dropped the ball on getting word out about this. And that's part of the reason you're getting such negative reaction.
I want to point out that I had an extensive conversation with Barry Leiden about this very thing.
He instigated that, right?
He did.
Yeah. And you have not talked to the other 2 residents, right?
They haven't reached out to me, and there's nothing to talk about. At this point, all we're asking for is permission to think about something. There is no proposed location. There is just if the sky's the limit, what could we look at? What are the options? What are things that could better serve Garrett Park? I can't talk about, like, it's almost like we're not allowed to think about things or not allowed to ponder ideas without talking to everybody before we even ponder them. And it's not, I absolutely reject the idea that we sprung this on anybody. Maybe people were surprised that this is something that was being considered or something that people are thinking about, but there's no comparison between this and the streetery in terms of the lack of involvement. We're nowhere near how far along that was when it was opened without any residents. This is a year prior. This is many months before we even think about, before we even have anything to talk about on this. And I'm just
so tell me what are the options besides where we're talking about, because
It's not
The
a thing,
prob-
Jim. I'm not going to answer that because that's not what this is about. This is about asking an architectural preservation architecture firm to say, look, we have town, here's the town, and here are 8 different pieces of property. Maybe if we rotated town hall in a different direction, it's saying, if you had the entire town to work with, what would you want to do? There is no, we're not to that point, Jim. We're not to that point.
Well, you don't have the entire town to work with. There are houses that on lots that people own, and the town owned land consists of a teeny strip of grassy area and a third of the basketball court, and then the lots across from the train station.
Yeah,
Where else can you put it?
that doesn't mean you can't like trade land with park agencies. I've worked on several projects that have done that. So and that's the thing. I just had ideas about, maybe you put it across from the train station, but it's probably terrible for noise. Maybe you put it next to Penn Place and then in the parkland and trade land with parks. And then you might be able to finally get town office and town hall in the building, in the same building. It might be a lot of community benefits to that, not just the town government. A lot of people would make it more of a central meeting place, but maybe that never outweighs the difficulty of getting it there. It's not an easy thing to say, hey, we're going to snap our fingers and do this. And it was never a thing of, oh, this is already decided. Again, it's already decided we're going to do it and, just work through a lot of resistance. The whole idea was to just get it started again with we had no budget and everybody wanted to fix, and there was no idea what fix was. Like, how do you find a budget? And I was saying initially, like, well, maybe we can gain like a couple $100,000 by moving it. And then what are the pros and cons instantly of, moving that? I started thinking of those, but I'm tired of like doing my work for free for this town. So I was figuring out, like, punt that to the RFP so somebody could look at it programmatically and kind of say, hey, it would be really nice if you had a town hall like a lot of other towns might have that can do these things that maybe you can't do on that site. And as a town, like, here's a sketch and here's a cost and here's what's involved in moving it. Is that something where the town sees it's worth going through all that to do it or not? But that's what's frustrating. It was never like a decided thing to go. I'm not really sure what to do. I mean, it's like, I can't express enough how frustrated it is for me. Like, so much free professional level time has been given, just on this project. And SRTS was the same thing. I wish I had so many of the hours back of my life that I wasted reading all the crap on the listserv. But honestly, it's a lot of crap. It's amazing how much distance there is between what was really going on, a lot of different things, and what people think. So it's really, it's disheartening to me. And almost like you get seen like you're out there trying to like ruin the town or something. It's just frustrating. So I'm not sure how to express it any differently.
Okay. I'm gonna move on. Bob Reinhardt, you have had your hand raised for a while. I think you're muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay. As some of you may know, I was on the council. I'm a retired architect, and I was very much involved in the whole process of Penn Place. And the conversations around Town Hall remind me very much of the conversations around Penn Place 20-some years ago. There were a lot of different ideas, including putting some of the functions of Penn Place on the 5 empty lots close to Town Hall or close to Penn Place. And it was very, very challenging and frustrating. I share your frustration, Steve, to try and build consensus in the town, because you have to agree on something in order to build something. Well, we interviewed, because I was on the Penn Place committee, probably 3 different architectural firms, all with a strong foundation in historic preservation. The late Nancy Schwartz had gotten a small grant from the Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commission to fund a feasibility study, which is, I think, what we're looking for now with regard to Town Hall. And the architect who was selected, who I have told about where we are now, was well known for his ability to bring people together with consensus through what we architects call a charrette. And I was extremely skeptical that this would work at the time. But I went along, and one Saturday, we all met in the old Garrett Park room, big room, the old Garrett Park School. And we broke up into 3 or 4 teams. Each team would have something of an expert. I was one of them, to develop one plan, one scheme. And whoever was interested in that particular scheme would join a team. And we would go back and forth and develop quick sketches, thinking the project through. As you say, you know, we want to think. Well, you got to, I know I've been an architect for 30 some years, and I understand it's hard for people to deal with the fact that they can hold 2 contradictory ideas in their head at the same time, but you can only build one. So we did this. We had our charrette, and I was amazed. At the end of the day, there was consensus. And you all see what that consensus was, because it's built. And I mean, we can talk about Town Hall for the next 40 years. As some of you may know, the traffic light on the corner of Strathmore and Kenilworth was discussed for 40 some years. The pros and the cons. So I strongly suggest, if you write a proposal to bring architects in, that you consider using a charrette, and I would highly recommend the same architectural firm that did Penn Place at least be invited.
Thank
That's
you,
all I
Bob.
have to say.
I want to point out that Councilmember Paskowski has held, I don't know if it's 1 or 2 charrettes on this, but it has been done.
Yes,
And
but this is a different thing, because this is conducted by an outside architect who has great experience in historic preservation and building consensus.
Yeah, I have a great experience in historic preservation, but I'm not like that. Even though I went to planning school, it's not my cup of tea to really do that kind of.
No, and you
leading
already
that
sound
type-
really frustrated by the whole
Yeah.
process. No offense, but you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
So I think the goal at the August 31st meeting was to stop the pushing this off and not get to 40 years of talking about doing this, and to actually start moving. And because this has been stopped and started for at least a decade that I know of. And so I want this to get moving. And the way to get this moving is to start, it is to not keep having discussions and to not keep having sort of navel gazing internally, but to hire experienced preservation architects who can help direct us and help us start moving ahead, and actually thinking about what these different options are and could be.
Well, it worked for us once.
Well,
I've
good.
seen it work a lot of places. Usually it does. There are a lot of people who are really good at doing us or things, either in the architecture side or the planning side. It is kind of like a special skill to be able to do it. So I'm with Bob on that. It would help to kind of really get that out there. Like I just haven't seen, it's like beating a dead horse. I just haven't seen kind of reaction things get in Garrett Park, and that's why I'm frustrated that, I did a presentation like this in Kensington on a historic asset that's more historic than our town hall. People were thrilled by what we did. And here it's kind of like shut down even talking about program. So it's new waters. So.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Brian Mizuguchi, you wanted to chime in.
Thank you. Yeah, I had requested time in the town residents presentation, but and I actually thought that what I wanted to talk about would be mooted by the news that the county historic preservation folks have said this is not likely going to be approved. And so that just seems to further bolster my view that it doesn't make sense to spend time and money, the town's money, taxpayer money, on something that, as council members recognized back in August, that realistically, we're not going to be able to do this even if people wanted to do it in terms of our ability to afford it. And so it may not be a lot of money, but it is money that could be used for other purposes, like doing the renovation work that has become much more expensive in the many years that have elapsed since the 2015 Paolo. I'm going to mispronounce those architects' names, but since that study. Earlier, just before the meeting, I updated the back of envelope rough estimates I had done of what I think the cost nowadays would be of two things. One is the original scope of work, the Balladimus, is it? Balladimus architects had done for
Balladimus, yeah.
Back in 2015. I applied some construction price indices, and it looks to me like that work would cost 2.4 million as of June of this year. And by the time it actually gets going, which I think is not likely to occur before 2024, that work is going to be about 2.75 million. And that doesn't include anything for the cost of relocating an historic building. I looked at the one thing I found quickly online about that, which was the cost of relocating an historic building in Detroit in 2019, one block. That was about $250 a square foot. I applied that to the square footage of town hall, and again, back of envelope. To me, calculated it would cost, especially when you take into account the added complexity of moving our town hall across the state highway into the north part of town. You'd probably have to cut off the bell tower, bring it to enable it to pass under the existing mature trees and power lines. I think that probably would not surprise me if the cost of removing town hall, relocating.
It's not removing. It's not removing. That's a not the right word, and it's kind of an unfair word.
Well, how is that unfair?
Because removing implies that we're getting rid of it. It's the word is move.
Moving it to the north side of town hall and renovating in place there. I think that would add another $1 million to the project. And so even as of this summer, I think you were looking at 3.4 million, and we don't have that.
But we don't know what those numbers are.
It would be 4 million. And so my point was, and I think this is where the council members who were asking in August, my point was, why would we spend the town's money on something we're not going to end up doing because we can't afford to do it? And that's just the fiscal end of it. Legally, you've heard already that county's not going to approve it, which makes
that's not right.
Yeah, none of these numbers are right either. I mean, so kind of appreciate the effort, but it's just like the numbers are way off. It would cost less to move it, and you wouldn't move it in one piece anyways. It wouldn't fit. It's just like kind of like, why are we going around like that?
Brian, it's not about how much money it would cost to do this project, because we have no idea. We have zero idea how much any of these renovation project pieces would cost. This is about the idea, the concept, the thinking about it. And I think it's worth my time thinking about it. And we don't know what it's going to cost to do anything at this. And so this is the first step prior to all that. And I think as council members Bennett and Schultz said, and DeBosch agreed, there's no harm in giving it a shot and seeing what is out there, and taking this first step. I hope, Jerry and Phil, I didn't mischaracterize what you said, but this is not at the moment about how much it's going to cost, because we have no idea and we can't know until we take this first step of getting this RFP done and start collecting bids.
Well, I'm not saying that, and I have never said that my figures are accurate. They're back of envelope calculations based on indices. I do think that it isn't necessarily the case that the argument for not spending this money turns on whether it's $1 million plus or minus my estimates. It really comes down to, is it realistic that the town, and for that matter, the county, would ever approve removing an historic property from its location across town and rebuilding it there? And I think the answer you clearly heard was it's not likely going to be approved. So that
mischaracterized so many things that were said. It's just amazing.
Can I speak without being interrupted?
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
So to me, that begs the question, why throw money after something that isn't likely going to be feasible when you could spend it on something else, like the cost of the renovations that are not covered?
So there's no money. There's no money being spent right now. We're not spending a single dime at this point. This is, and the council affirmed the decision to not remove it or to include this, to just ask questions of what it would cost to think about this. And so I think the consensus that I asked a half hour ago was, are we willing to let this RFP move forward and ask the question of what it would cost to consider this? And so I think that it's even, I mean, I'm not going to say $1 million to think about this, but I think that it is a good exercise for the town to think about. We don't know what's going to come of it. Maybe it'll jar some ideas, and maybe there'll be some really interesting concepts for us to think about that, as Councilmember DeBosch said, it's not one or the other necessarily. It could be taken apart and thought about separately. Sorry, Donna, did you want to speak for yourself so that I'm not speaking for you?
No, and not at all. And yes, you did have my point correctly. I just wanted to reiterate that the two pieces do not have to be, my idea is the two pieces do not necessarily have to be together, or even conducted simultaneously or not. There's a need for renovations of the town hall, and thinking about the what ifs and the possibilities can be separated from that, but conducted also within the same time frame. Therefore, getting both sides accomplished, if you will. And maybe there would be more, a little bit more space for people to grasp that understanding that this is a thought process activity and not necessarily an implementation of such.
Well said. Agreed. And there's the opportunity to slice this piece off if we get back bids for which we've paid nothing. We'll have the opportunity to slice that off and stop the train at that point. But what we've said is that we're not cutting off that discussion right now.
Well, respectfully, Mayor, anytime you solicit bids, I've been in a law firm, I'm sure others have been in professional firms, the cost of business development is built into the rates that you're quoted. So you will be paying for asking for someone to develop a proposal for the study of moving town hall. And I guess the last thing I'd like to say, besides that, I'm disappointed that in the face of the county's indication that they will not approve moving town hall, that it is not cutting off discussion to weigh in with one's views about practicality of an expenditure of town money. And I respect greatly all the work that Stephen has done in the many years he's been on council. This is just about one of the 4 options in the RFP. And the one option that it seems to me and others is not something we're ever going to do, and I think it's hard to understand why we would spend money on that, why we would not focus on the things everyone agrees needs to be done and get it done before we risk the rescission of these funds if they're not obligated in time.
That's not a thing. That's not going to happen. There is, first of all, we're not required to use this. We have not committed to using the ARPA funds on this project. And so, I mean, that's not applicable in this particular case. So, you know, the ARPA funds there's no risk going on there at all. No risk of losing that.
Well, in my experience, and it's not obviously on the scale, but to get something designed and permitted and under contract, I do think there's a good chance you'll be looking at this in 2024. And if it has to be obligated by December of 2024.
And what I just said, though, was that we are not obligated, the town council, the town of Garrett Park is not obligated to spend those funds on this project. And in fact, we're thinking about other things that we're gonna float some ideas coming up in the coming weeks of other ways to get things moving with spending that fund. So that's not, it doesn't matter how long this takes. This is not related to the town's ability to spend the federal funds, the Recovery Act funds.
Sorry,
the time's already 8:30 and we're really far behind. Does anybody on the council want to chime in or rethink what we decided about keeping the requirements or the mandate to Barb for what to include in the RFP? Has that changed at all with the discussions that we've heard, the points we've heard from Brian, Bob, and Jim?
One last question for me, I apologize. Is that section mandatory for all applicants to the RFP, or is it an option?
My understanding in conversations with the mayor is that it was going to be included as a bid alternate so that it would be separately priced and you all could look at it at that time. Mayor, is that correct?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you.
no
change on my part.
Sorry.
I'm
One
sorry.
last thing in my time, if I could. I had asked that if you were going to go ahead with this RFP, that it be a separate line item. And I also asked that if you're going to award that you make it public, how much you're going to spend on that.
Thank you for that. We are many months away from that piece.
The architectural piece, that's what I'm talking about.
I understand. Yeah.
If I may, the likely dollar amount of this contract would require approval by the town council at a public meeting.
Okay, I would like to move on since we are, it's 8:30 and we have lots more to go.
I think Jim has one last question though, if we can.
Okay. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I have one quick question. If we don't spend the COVID money on this, doesn't that mean we have to come up with another $1 million or $1.5 million from some other sources to fix up town hall?
It's just a matter of allocating funds differently.
It's not the only need. And it's just back in the spring, town was being told that you wouldn't be able to spend it on anything but stormwater, and Donna's group really looked into a lot of that, and kind of as all that was evolving, and it was only just, I guess, maybe in the late spring that it came, you know, as some people in town had speculated, had worked on these things before, that it would probably open up to a lot of other uses. So it's relatively new that it could be spent. So it's been a need that's been around in town for years, but it's not the only need. There's a lot of
I understand that, but
infrastructure to work on. So
So we would spend this $1 million on something. I guess I'm confused when you say it doesn't matter if we spend this COVID money on the town hall. Do we really have $1 million of other money to move into the town hall bucket and replace that with the COVID money?
I mean, the renovating town hall and working on making town hall better or more useful for the town was, I mean, it had never been dependent upon this money before, so it doesn't change that. But we have other needs in town that we can address with these funds. Sorry, Donna, go ahead.
I think this is part of the conversation, with all due respect, are a little bit premature. So if we could couch it and move on, I'd really appreciate it.
Okay, I
Okay.
agree. I agree. Barb, I'm going to come back to you for, let's see, town office renovation. How's that? Have you been able to move forward on that at all?
Sure, I will be very brief in the interest of time. Have had a number of discussions with Lumber and Light. I hope to have revised concept plans to you no later than next week. Just as a reminder, they had given you an option as far back as June, incorporating only tenant space A. So essentially they've been using that document as a base and have been making refinements. So once again, I should have that for you by the end of next week at the latest.
That's exciting.
And then the only last thing I just mentioned, as I already kind of touched on, we did receive the money to clear out the former Yendel home. That process has actually taken place. They finished up work, I guess it was last week. So certainly there are some things ahead of it in line, but now that the house is cleared out, in the near future, we'll start working on the bid documents to have the house taken down.
When you say near future, do you mean like, is this something that's going to wait, that you not going to have, will you have a chance to do those bid documents before the end of 2022? Do you think it's going to be after that, just so that we can kind of know what to expect?
I hope to do so. Obviously, town hall has been noted as your top priority. So that's kind of first on the list, but hopefully can get to it before the end of the calendar year.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Let's see, time is 8:33. Adoption of ordinance number 2022-4, the fiscal year or the FY 2023 budget amendment.
Thank you. This is the same ordinance that was before you at your September meeting for introduction. Essentially, what it would do is move certain funds as you all directed at your meeting in July to the appropriate budgetary account to fund certain baseline activities associated with turning the former Yendel property into a park. Nothing has changed in the ordinance since it was introduced last month, but certainly I'd be happy to answer any questions that you all have.
The only question I had was section 1 of the now therefore. Did we decide on the name Yendel Grove? And if so, should we be consistent on that?
I don't think that's actually come before you. I had expected someone from perhaps the Parks and Open Spaces Committee to be on the call this evening. Obviously, that did not occur. Certainly, if you all have settled on that name, you could certainly make that change in the ordinance.
Crickets.
Well,
That was the first I heard the name. So.
That's what I wasn't sure how many of you had known that was under consideration.
Yeah,
I think we heard garden before. Yeah.
I heard garden as in general, but that's about it.
Garden.
Yeah, I mean, I view the budgetary ordinance as more sort of generic, since it kind of, the term park sort of recognizes the conservation easement restriction on the property. I don't think it necessarily was intended or necessarily has to denote what you ultimately end up naming the park.
That's fine. That's fine.
There's definitely time for that, because it would be a long time before it went on the map as
Sure.
whatever it is.
Sure. We need a motion to adopt this this budget amendment.
I will move to adopt the budget amendment ordinance 22 2022-4, amending the FY 2023 budget to address costs associated with the town-owned property at 11321 Kenilworth Avenue, commonly known as the Yandell property.
I second it.
Thank you. All those in favor? Say
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and nobody here to oppose, so it's unanimous, and we, with that, we approve that budget amendment. Anything under unfinished business? I think, Barb, that we didn't have anything that we were gonna move on to that.
No, we do
So-
not. It's just there as sort of a placeholder in case anybody wants to bring something up.
Great, okay, well, the time is 8:37. Moving on to new business. The first item on that is appointment to Historic Preservation Committee. We have had a couple of resignations from Historic Preservation Committee in recent months, and I am pleased to seek the council's approval of the appointment of Pamela Parker to the Historic Preservation Committee for a term that will be approximately a little less than 2 years. And in that role, she would help develop policies and standards, criteria, and guidelines for maintaining the historic heritage of Garrett Park. Anybody willing to move to accept that appointment?
I'll move to accept the appointment for sure.
I can always count on you, Phil. Thank you.
I'll second it.
Okay.
I love the train in stereo.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, and no opposition. Great. Welcome to Historic Preservation, Pamela. Let's see, next item under new business, time is 8:38. Proposed changes to the town personnel manual. I just want to point out this is going to be with Assistant Town Manager Caleb Bucher. This is an informational thing. You're trying to get our sense of if we're on the right direction with these changes, correct? Caleb?
Correct. So with the meeting documents, you all received a robust 26-page memo. The majority of that is our current existing personnel manual. If you look at, I believe, the first 4 pages, it helps walk you through some of what we're looking at. So kind of starting from the most important and the ones with which there is the least opportunity for town to play around with, I will direct your attention to the section on sick and safe leave, also known as the Maryland Healthy Working Families Act of 2018. The town does currently offer paid sick leave to employees. It's accrued at a rate of 1 day per month, broken up into hours per pay period. The town is required to, under the Healthy Working Families Act of 2018, provide a minimum of 1 hour of unpaid sick leave per 30 hours worked. Obviously, what currently exists is more robust, goes above and beyond what is legally required of the town. In this section, all I'm really looking for council is approval to change the language in the manual to acknowledge we are aware of the Healthy Working Families Act. We have verified that our existing sick leave is compliant or better with what's required of us. It basically give Town Manager Barb Matthews the go-ahead to send out a memo to staff to say, hey, as a reminder, you do have leave. Here are eligible uses for it. Part of the reason I'm recommending that Barb send out a memo is because the Healthy Working Families Act does include some provision about using your sick and safe leave if there are matters of domestic violence, stalking, family health issues beyond what we might normally think of as eligible uses for sick leave. Because the town already budgets for the paid sick leave that's made available to employees, I'm not anticipating any budgetary change to come from this. It's mostly just getting the paperwork in order so that we are in good standing with the state of Maryland. And so that's kind of change number one. Moving through that section that was titled Changes to be Compliant, I'm going to draw your attention to a couple of other state and federal laws that we need to be aware of. Not all of them apply to us, but we did want to investigate and make sure that we were aware of any lingering needs in terms of addressing it. The Family Medical Leave Act does not currently apply to the town of Garrett Park based on a couple of factors, predominantly the fact that we have a very small group of employees who don't all meet the eligible employee requirement. So we are not requiring any sort of change to acknowledge FMLA. I do want to highlight as well the Maryland Parental Leave Act, which more recently went into effect. And that is another one where, due to the town's small staff size, it is not currently relevant to us. If there's ever an amendment to the law, we potentially would have to reevaluate and work with legal counsel to make sure that we continue to be compliant. But at this point in time, there's nothing we need to amend in our handbook. I will highlight.
Can I ask really quick? Another reason we could choose to enact or to adopt FMLA language, but how do our policies compare with what is required under that? And are we offering more than is required? And so we just, we're already providing this for our employees.
So we could theoretically adopt language to mirror and mimic FMLA. I will point out that FMLA is unpaid. Currently, there is an existing provision in the manual addressing particularly leave for parents, whether that be birth, adoption, fostering. We do currently have an existing leave policy, and that is a paid leave. So while it is shorter in terms of the duration of the leave, because it is paid, I would argue we either come out equal or we come out slightly ahead. So I assure you we're not leaving anyone out in the cold. We do have longstanding provisions looking to address that.
Yeah, Kayla, if I can jump in. FMLA is obviously broader than just parental leave. It covers a wide variety of purposes. So one difference, so kind of getting outside of the immediate parental leave context, if you are an employer who is subject to FMLA, you are required to provide 12 weeks of leave for those covered events. As Kayla indicated, doesn't necessarily mean you're paid for them. Most policies require an employee to first take any accrued leave. But one of the provisions in FMLA, if you are subject to that as an employer, is during that 12-week period, you are required to provide health insurance on the same basis as you would if the employee was actively working. So if an employer were to find themselves for either a parental leave situation or some other medical reason, our leave without pay program does not require the town to cover the cost of health insurance. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So there's a lot of nuances to this, but I did just want to note that it's broader than parental leave. And the health insurance is sort of an important aspect of why FMLA was passed by the federal government initially.
All right. I am going to continue on. We're still in section 1, changes to be compliant. I do want to draw everyone's attention to the Maryland Time to Care Act. This was rather recently passed. Unfortunately, we don't yet have much guidance from the state of who's all going to be caught up into it and how it would have to be implemented. The early and preliminary information we have is that we should know more by June 1 of 2023. Because we don't have information to make a recommendation, the recommendation for this is just to do another review of the personnel manual in spring of 2023 to make sure we continue to be compliant with state laws. So truly, it's meant to be a living document. And the hope is that after the 1-year review in 2023, we can move to an every other year schedule to review and update as needed. And hopefully it won't be quite as daunting a project or a document if we are more consistent with being up to date. So we are now moving into changes to be consistent. For the most part, these changes are just amending the language to reflect what's already currently happening in town, just so that we have it written in one comprehensive document rather than kind of scattered piecemeal. The first change in there is just addressing town payment of insurance premiums. In the current manual, there is no specification of what percentage of a premium the town pays when it comes to an employee plus one other, or a full family coverage. As noted in the memo, there is kind of a practice of, if it's just the employee, the premium is paid 100%. For others, it is 75% of the dependent coverage. So realistically, all I'm asking for is kind of council's blessing to change the language to say, this is what it currently is, and to maintain the existing language that says council has the right to change the percentage contribution if in 10 years we are looking at, let's say, incredibly high insurance costs and we need to reevaluate and maybe go to a different split. The next change to be consistent is just looking at our use of comp time. So currently we don't have a cap on the number of comp hours that can be accrued. We do currently say in the manual that they are meant to be either used within 90 days of accrual, or that they're meant to revert back to overtime pay and get paid out as such. There is a pretty significant administrative burden with tracking these hours. You could have 60 hours and you could have earned 5 in May. You could have earned 20 in July. And so trying to stay on top of it has meant that we have not always been consistent with following our own manual. In the course of conversations, not only with Barb, but also with the employees who are eligible for comp time, we talked about other options, and something that everyone felt comfortable with and that would hopefully help prevent the need for a large leave payout. If ever someone was to separate, as well as to help us better track our time, would be just establishing a max of, you may have 40 hours of comp time. It can roll over indefinitely. If you have 40 hours and there's a snowstorm and you're looking at another 12 hours, that will be paid to you as overtime. The employees we currently talk to felt 40 hours was a fair and appropriate bank amount. They didn't raise any concerns that they would be missing out on anything. And so I just think this is something that I would like council to consider, so that we are consistent with our own policies, but also more prepared in the event an employee separates from town, that we're not looking at an unexpected and large payout of leave. The final change to be consistent is another one that just kind of changes the language to make everything a bit clearer, not only for employees, but also for town residents. Currently, the setup for town holidays includes 2 floating holidays that Barb, as town manager, has to determine and announce before January 1 of the calendar year. It's been the practice that at least one of those floating holidays is used for the Friday after Thanksgiving, and the other has been, I believe, historically used as the birthday holiday, a kind of employee selected holiday for when it could be used. While that is a valid choice to make, it does sometimes mean that town residents are uncertain of when they would be able to expect town staff to be available to answer questions and help with problems. And so the employees were kind of polled of, would they be open to moving away from floating holidays and to move towards a permanent holiday, basically amending our list of holidays in the manual to say the Friday after Thanksgiving and Christmas Eve are now permanent holidays, consistently moving forward. There would no longer be a year-to-year potential for change. Employees were open to that. It was pretty well received. And so this is just asking for council's blessing to change the language. This does not increase the number of holidays available to employees. It does not decrease it. It just changes the language.
Something that didn't occur to me when we were talking about this before is what happens if Christmas is on a Sunday, Christmas Eve is on a Saturday? Would they then be eligible for Thursday and Friday off?
Barb,
Yeah, the usual practice is, I think in most governmental agencies, is if the holiday falls on a Saturday, it's observed on a Friday.
Mhm.
And if the actual holiday falls on a Sunday, then it's observed on a Monday. But
So-
certainly the employees would get their holidays.
So if Christmas is on a Sunday, then they would get Friday and Monday. Because if our holiday is Christmas Eve, then they would get that Friday. If Christmas Eve is on Saturday.
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to. Sorry, I hadn't thought about that before. Just wanted to ask.
that's part of why we're bringing it before you all now, so that you have time to think and ask these questions. Okay, we're in the home stretch. I know this is not the most invigorating of projects. So the final set of recommendations we have are just meant to make the town more competitive when it comes to both recruitment of employees, but also retaining existing employees. So the first change we see here is altering the percent that is contributed to employee retirement. Currently, 2% of the employee's salary is automatically contributed to a 457B account, and the town will match up to 2.5% if the employee chooses to make additional contributions. Looking back at the history of what's been contributed to employee accounts, there was a point where the town was contributing, I believe, 7%, no match required. That's not a particularly sustainable way of approaching it, and that's part of why we moved to the 2 and 2.5% contribution setup we currently see. In reviewing employee manuals for several other neighboring communities that are of a similar size to Garrett Park, it was noted that the retirement contribution was among the lowest in the region, and that was kind of singled out as an area where town could improve. What I am recommending is that town consider moving to a 3% automatic contribution of employees' salary after 6 months with an up to 3% match. It's about a 1.5% increase, which for this year, based on current employee salaries and current levels of contribution, it's estimated that it'd be less than $7,000 to make that change for this budgetary year. As the memo does point out, and that I do want to highlight, there is a substantial cost savings in the benefit line item. I can tell you that happened for 2 reasons. And Barb, I think you can help chime in as needed. But when the town was budgeting for this fiscal year, they budgeted for the town manager position and the assistant town manager position on the assumption that family level health insurance coverage would be needed. As things have developed with Barb staying on and with me joining the town, we have not needed that level of coverage. And so that has opened up funding that would cover the estimated total increase if we were to move to this level of retirement contribution. Any questions on the retirement so far? Everyone's still awake? Home stretch, I promise. The other kind of changes to be compliant are a little simpler. One is looking at the town's bereavement policy. There is a currently existing policy of, I'm trying to think how to phrase this, of who can pass that you would be granted leave to attend their funeral and otherwise grieve. So one part of the recommendation is to modify the language to include aunts and uncles, but also members of your household who might not otherwise be captured in the existing definition of relatives that are included. The other recommendation is to go from 2 days of leave to 3. This is not anticipated to have any sort of budgetary impact. The thing with bereavement leave is you can go years at a time with no one using it, or you could have a really unfortunate year where multiple people suffer losses. There is unfortunately no way to predict it. So that's one of the simpler changes that I'm hoping council will consider approving. The next kind of change to be competitive, and it's our final one, and then I will stop talking. Our final one is looking at the rates with which employees accrue annual leave. And this is something that Joanna and I and Barb talked about, looking at trying to make sure that we are staying competitive with other communities. We have not changed the total numbers of hours that people can accrue. We have not substantially decreased it. We've just kind of altered how much time do you have to be with the town in order to be eligible for, let's call it step 1, step 2. Looking at the memo on page 3 and going on to page 4, you can see we are looking to move from 10 days, anywhere from 6 months to 5 years of service, to 10 days if you have less than 4 years of service. It still keeps the same number of days. It just creates kind of an intermediate step if you have more than 7 years of service, but less than 11 years of service. I believe in reviewing this and talking about possible options, Barb, I think we determined that we don't currently anticipate any existing employee to be negatively impacted by
That's
this.
correct. Yes.
Okay. So to wrap up, we have a set of changes that I hope council will consider. For the most part, with the exception of the retirement contribution, these changes are not anticipated to have any sort of budgetary impact. We're not going to be spending more money. It's mostly just trying to keep us compliant with state law, make us a little more consistent within our own practices, and make us a bit more competitive. Are there questions? Are there areas you'd like me to circle back to address in much greater detail? I see your hand, Donna.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, but I do want to say thank you for the very thorough and detailed analysis and approach to the employee handbook. You can see that you're a great asset to the town, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you as well. Helpful to hear it all and go through it point by point. I feel like a lot of the things you're talking about are things that, like you were saying, they're already kind of done, but it's getting them recorded, and they seem to be, most of it sounds pretty familiar, because I think it's just pretty common both in government and private industry to have benefits about like that range.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Phil, did you have anything you wanted to?
Yes. First, thank you for the detailed analysis. I do have a question, though, and it has to do, and maybe you kind of answered it, but it says the definition of family be modeled on text from Tacoma Park would be modified to include aunts, uncles, household members. Were there any others, or was it just adding aunts, uncles, and household members?
It was just adding aunts, uncles, and household members. So the current definition that the town of Garrett Park has includes, and I'm going to really quickly scroll to it,
I know.
brothers, brothers-in-laws, all of that good stuff. We just somehow, we missed a few people, which we can joke about now, but I would not want to have to be Barb if someone had a beloved aunt pass away and be the one to tell them, actually, we don't consider that a relative to be worthy of leave.
I believe that we did at the time because nobody else did, or at least the majority of people did not at the time we wrote it, because I was actually part of the group who wrote the thing. So, so good catch. I mean, I just wanted to clarify that one a little bit.
Totally understandable. And like I think I touched on earlier, this is meant to be a living document. The hope is that if we can get it on kind of an every other year schedule, we won't have these situations in the future where I'm asking for 6 or 7 changes. Just kind of get everyone thumbs up, thumbs down. Is everyone on board with what I'm asking? You want to see a different change or what have you?
I did have one more question. So what is the enactment method if we want to make some or all of the changes you're recommending? And I want to echo Donna's thank you for all the detailed work and the very clear explanation in the memo. Thank you for that.
Thank you. I believe, Barb, what we'd be looking for is just a simple motion, particularly because the retirement does have a cost associated with it. And then I believe our hope is that I could send a draft over to, and my apologies, I'm forgetting his name. Who's the
attorney, the town attorney?
Yeah, so to clarify, I think tonight would just be a simple motion indicating that you're supportive of the changes. I think when it comes to the entire manual, we'll come back to you, so you have the opportunity to see it in its entirety. I've not discussed this with Ron Bolt, but I think it would probably be appropriate to adopt the personnel manual by resolution. I believe it may have been handled in that manner before, and I think one of the things Phil's nodding his head, thank you. I think one of the things you would want to do as part of that resolution is make sure that this adoption of the manual supersedes any and all other personnel decisions, just to make sure that there's nothing hanging out there we don't know about. But I think right now our tentative timeline is after tonight's meeting, Kayla will be continuing to type away on the manual. I've actually suggested to the mayor that we actually have an employment law firm review it. It's the firm that staffs the local government insurance trust employment hotline, because this is a fairly specialized area of law. And then if timing works, and it may be a little tight, our thought was to bring this back and place the resolution adopting the new manual on the town council meeting agenda for December, with any and all changes going into effect on January 1st.
And one thought for that timing is because we want things to be clear for health. There were some health insurance things that are still, you're still working on, Kayla, is that right? And so we want this to be able to be, no, am I, okay. I think there was a reason that we wanted it to be clear and ready to go January 1st.
I think part of it was the holidays, so that we could basically post all the town holidays prior to the start of 2023, I think was part of the thought, Joanna, that you had, as I recall.
So circling back to the health insurance, at one point in time, we have been kind of waiting for more information about the prescription plan insurance. Side note for the general education of everyone, we are a participating agency through Montgomery County. Montgomery County's setup splits out health insurance and your prescription plan insurance. There had been a level of prescription insurance coverage that employees had been electing, and that both Barb and I had been hearing from Montgomery County Office of Human Resources, that plan was being phased out. That plan was a relatively high cost plan in comparison to the other plans available. Montgomery County has already phased that out. We don't need to take any action. They're no longer making it available for employees to elect into. And employees were informed of that, and Montgomery County is handling transitioning them all to a different plan. That was the only kind of health insurance component that we were waiting to see, but that resolved itself about a week and a half ago. So we are in the clear.
Great.
Thank you. So I have one follow-up question. So the retirement plan contributions for this year, fiscal year 23, the change would stay within what we had already budgeted. But I assume, based on the way you wrote the memo, it's possible in future years that we might have to increase budgets if there were different health plan choices made by the employees. Did I understand that correctly?
You started, I believe, with retirement and then went into health insurance. So I'm going to try and.
Right. Well, because in your memo, you stated that the change to the retirement plan would not have a budgetary impact this year because of the benefits selections that had already been made by current employees.
So we currently in our line item budget have just one broad benefits category that includes health insurance, retirement, accidental death and dismemberment, life insurance, and a few other policies. So we don't need to have council move money from this line item. It's more of a clarification of, you would put that money into the line item thinking you would need it to cover health insurance costs. Because Barb and I have not elected for family coverage, it's left, what was the number?
7,000.
7,000 is what the retirement would cost. I believe the excess from the health insurance elections is a bit closer to 10,000, if I recall my figures correctly. So that's why you aren't going to see a request coming through for additional funding being put into that line item. There's already money there. So my apologies if I didn't clarify that. Did that answer your question sufficiently, Geraldine?
I think so. There's no budgetary impact this year. There could be in the future,
And that's
depending.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't anticipate changing my health insurance needs, but also,
Right, and that's not what I'm asking. Didn't ask that. I just wanted to make sure we all understand that even though it didn't have a budgetary impact this year, in the future, this could have a future budgetary impact.
And that's part of the beauty of setting this to go into effect January 1, because that means it would be in effect as you start preparing the fiscal year 2024 budget. And so you can hopefully make sure whatever you budget is sufficient for the anticipated needs. So
Thank you. I appreciate you answering my confusing question.
I'm happy to do it. And I thank you all for staying awake and staying patient with me. I know that was not the most exciting portion of what we could talk about. And then I am going to mute myself. And I believe we are going next to committees, correct?
Actually, Barb, so we had on the agenda for a bit of a discussion about town code enforcement provisions. The idea being, let's talk about what the need is and not talk specifically about what the new provisions would be at the point that that this is introduced, but just what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And by the way, the time is 9:09. Barb, I'm going to let you take the conversation as you'd prepared it.
Sure, and thank you, Joanna, for that introduction. So I would probably say that probably even rolling it back a little bit more, I think with some of the questions that came up at the September meeting, when I had brought forward an ordinance for possible introduction, there seemed to be a number of questions about how the town handled different types of violations. So this is really intended almost more to be a primer, certainly if there's, to the extent possible. There were some questions, for example, that Jared Lee had posed at the last meeting. So where applicable, I tried to answer the questions that came up at the meeting in September, but I'll just kind of jump into it and try to keep it fairly short. So I guess the first comment I'd like to make is there's really two different types of violations under Maryland law that would impact a municipality. One is basically a criminal offense and the other is a civil offense. So our particular town code language says that violations are misdemeanors or crimes unless they are expressly declared to be lesser infractions or a civil infraction. And in the world of municipal government, civil violations are referred to as municipal infractions. So you'll see that language in our code. A misdemeanor, as I mentioned, is a crime. It requires prosecution by the state's attorney's office. And the state's attorney's office has the discretion whether to prosecute or not prosecute anything that is a misdemeanor under the Garrett Park Town Code. Municipal infractions, by contrast, are civil violations. They can be prosecuted by the town. Under Maryland law, the maximum fine for a municipal infraction is $1,000. And I am going to just sort of note some things from the ordinance that was before you, just by kind of to clarify some things. So the ordinance that was on last month's agenda did include a provision at the recommendation of the town attorney that would grant the town the ability to prosecute any violations as municipal infractions, even if in the code they are declared misdemeanors. And I believe the reason the town attorney did that is if something was a violation of town code, was a misdemeanor, the state's attorney's office declined to prosecute, but the town felt strongly that it still wanted to pursue some type of action. That's why it would have granted the ability of the town to prosecute something that the state's attorney's office chose not to. In terms, there were also a number of questions last month about kind of different violation classifications, what were the fines? And I did want to clarify a misstatement I made last month. As you may recall, the town attorney included language in the ordinance that was on last month's agenda that basically declared a municipal infraction punishable by a fine not exceeding $100 for a first violation and $200 for a subsequent or violation of the same code provision. Phil did bring up that there were other sections in the code that were not changed, and that's where I made my misstatement. So the town attorney, in talking to him following your meeting last month, informed me that his intention was not to try to replace each and every section where there was a fine amount. It was essentially to ensure that there was a default fine amount in the code in case one was not otherwise stated. So I did want to clarify that because I did not give you accurate information at the last meeting. Last month, Councilmember Bennett asked how the proposed ordinance would have affected the fines for traffic and parking violations. Once again, as I just stated, the default fine amounts that were included in the proposed ordinance were not intended to supersede any existing fines for traffic, parking violations, or anything else. It was simply to plug a gap in case the code did not list a fine amount. Similarly, Councilmember Bennett had also inquired or possibly expressed interest in maybe imposing a higher fine amount for any violations related to town trees. The town council does have flexibility as the legislative body to set fines at the level that you want, as long as a municipal infraction does not exceed $1,000. That is a cap under state law. So that is sort of the limit of your discretion. Included in the agenda packet was kind of an abbreviated summary of town code provisions, how those particular violations were classified, and where applicable, I noted the associated fine amount if it was stated. Certainly, there are lots of ways someone can violate a town code. So this was not intended to be a comprehensive list of each and every violation that could exist. What I tried to do is to pick up any sections in the code that did specifically state a fine amount. Those were going to be municipal infractions once again, or any language that specifically stated and used the word unlawful. So I know there was a lot of interest in, what would be a violation of the code, including from some members of the public. So once again, I don't want to state that this is an all-inclusive list, but it certainly should give you an idea of what the current fines are in the code. And certainly, at some future date, you may wish to kind of consider that information and decide if you want to change the amounts of the fines that are in your code. The ordinance that was before you last month, just as a reminder, included language concerning the issuance of a stop work order by either the town or the county. If adopted, it would have imposed a fine of $1,000 for anyone who violates a issued stop work order. Once again, that was just proposed. That is not currently part of the town code. Lastly, there was also some questions about how different laws apply. So our code in section 108 specifically states that the town of Garrett Park exempts itself from all legislation enacted by Montgomery County government, provided that the town has the legislative authority by either state law to do so. There are some exceptions to that broad exemption from county law, and in section 109, and there's a copy of this section of the code in your agenda packet, it specifically states the county code chapters that the town has elected to opt into. So that can be found in attachment 2 in your agenda packet. So once again, this is just really intended to give you an idea of the framework of how different code violations are handled under the town code. Certainly, I'm not a lawyer, but would be happy to answer any questions that you have to the best of my ability.
What about the issue that that Phil raised about sort of a backstop, or like a second opinion about this enforcement? I'm sorry, Phil, please, if you want to restate your question.
Well, I think you pretty well got it, but basically a method of appeal before having to go, both parties having to go to court for it. In other words, I was thinking of, in the past, there were some things where the town council was involved. And so I was wondering if there was going to be anything like that where somebody had a method of appealing before going to court.
Yeah, ultimately, that's obviously up to you all as the legislative body. I did follow up, Phil, with the town attorney. He would say such a provision, in his estimation, would be unusual and would likely be administratively burdensome and slow down getting code violations corrected. But certainly whatever you all choose to do is up to you as the town council.
I mean, it sounds like if there were an appeal process, I mean, if the violation is that somebody parked too close to the street or too close to the corner and there was a no parking sign, I mean, if there were an appeal process, well, I don't want to have to move my car away from this place. Kind of what's the point of having that rule in the first place? I mean, if we're just talking about strict enforcement of the rules or of the expectations, I don't quite understand the need for an appeal. Aside from maybe we reconsider having those rules in the first place.
I thought Phil's point was interesting, but I would just wonder if it would just open the door. I think, would there be a case where somebody wouldn't just say, oh, I know I can appeal, so I'm just going to appeal anything, just like every sports scenario by the referee. If the other team doesn't like it, they instantly shout that it's wrong. I mean, I feel like that could be the same thing here. Everything would be an appeal. So it would just go to council anyway. It sounds like that's unusual in the town attorney's eyes to do it that way.
Yeah, typically, if I may, and Phil, I don't want to cut you off from saying something because I know this item is of interest to you. Typically, the general expectation under state law for any kind of violation would be that you would give the party, a notice of violation. There would be a time period in which the individual is to cure the violation. A lot of times, it depends on the nature of it, but oftentimes that's 10 days. And then basically, if the issue is not resolved or there's not some other type of agreement between the parties, then you usually move to the next step. So that's the way it most commonly works.
Jerry, you mentioned something to me in conversation about this topic in previous days about how we need to make sure that we're being careful and being Garrett Parky in the sense of we don't want to just be like a dictum from a dictation or like a declaration from on high, hey, you must do this, but that really the Garrett Park way of doing things would be to start gently with a more personalized conversation. That's not the easiest thing, but I think to have that in mind and to be neighborly about this is definitely something that I can work on, that there would be that I need practice with. But I think that having that in mind of being Garrett Parky is a positive.
I'm never going to admit to having uttered that phrase.
You didn't say Garrett Parky. You did not say Garrett Parky. But you know what I'm talking about, though.
But I did like how you said that. I think most of the public input we heard about this was about the concern of how, depending upon the continuity in the town office and in the overall town government, that it might be applied inconsistently. And so I know that is a concern, and we want to have a certain amount of balance for people to have free expression with the way they keep their gardens, keep their homes. But at the same time, if it, I think the town does need to have ways to address some of the egregious code enforcement issues that might come into play and have come into play in the past. So it's helpful to have the additional information about all the different current infractions in the code that this may or may not apply to. I will just add a comment that the Arboretum Committee did discuss this at its last meeting, and they are interested in working with the town office to ensure that permit application approvals provide more clear guidelines about tree protection. And there is interest in increasing the fines for not following those guidelines and putting town trees in danger. But there was also some expression from members of the committee interested in not necessarily lumping that together with this particular initiative. I think the biggest benefit from this current initiative for the tree protection is increasing the total possible fine, so that if the committee is able to work with the town to establish a more clear set of rules and enforcement for protecting trees during construction projects, that the fines could be more meaningful. So I just wanted to clarify what kind of conversations have been going on with the committee in that regard.
I will go back to what I was originally discussing, and I will say that the first thing is, it was brought up about inconsistency. I mean, right now, we know what we will do because we're discussing it, but in the future, we don't know what other people will do. And in addition, there is nothing in the law, because essentially we've made it a code of law, although I'm not a lawyer, but we've written down these rules. And so being Garrett Parky or being nice or whatever doesn't show up here. It's not I can point to this and say your first time is a warning or something to this effect, or there's something else. And that's why I look for having a way of, maybe the appeals get heard only on certain nights. Maybe they're only for certain items. But the deal is that right now you've got one, maybe two people who could singly apply these rules. And if for some reason there is an issue between, say, a resident and the mayor or the town manager, I could easily see a bunch of trouble. And the ability to be able to appeal it might save money for everybody and save time for everybody. The second thing is, along with some of these things, what are we doing as far as defining what is a violation? Some things are kind of, we understand, but other things, and I haven't looked through everything, don't necessarily have a full definition. Are we going to define what is considered a violation so everybody is on the same page?
It sounds like we'd need definitions beyond what the county has. I think they have one that's for like mowing grass. I think it's 12 inches max, but like some others have said, it doesn't necessarily align with Garrett Park. We have quite a few people that have a xeriscape in town, so it's not really the usual lawn thing. So we have to probably figure out a way to make a wide band of definition for those things, so it's reasonable and applicable here. Not sure how to do it without it getting out of hand, trying to cover every possible scenario. But it seems like we need more than nothing, but we can't make a meal of it.
Agreed, but if it's loose, this is again why I go back to having an appeal. And again, it could be limited to certain things or
Yeah.
not.
What if it was something where somebody could appeal, but if it really was just not reasonable to appeal it, then could it be said that the case wouldn't really be heard? But if it did seem like it was worth listening to, then do it. I don't know if that would probably still not satisfy whoever didn't disagree. But
Yeah, I would just say if there are, obviously the county enforces certain things on behalf of the town, or can certainly do so. I think if there are things in our own code that you all don't feel are appropriately defined, then you might wish to give, I guess my first recommendation to you all would be to share what those items are that you don't feel are appropriately defined in the code, and that you modify the code to provide that desired clarity. That would seem to be a good starting point from my perspective.
Well, seeing as this was just more of a conversation and answering of questions,
Right.
what is the, I guess the way of moving it forward is folks who are concerned about what our code says, or the clarity of our infractions, or definition of our infractions. If you could all just look at that, and let's circle back with Barb and tell her what those concerns are, so that we can try to clear this up. And I mean, I don't think her attempt to talk about enforcement provisions, I mean, just because she's not enumerating all the different code elements doesn't mean that they're not applied, that the enforcement doesn't apply to it. This is just finally giving enforcement to what we've already decided as a town are the parameters for what's acceptable. So I mean, there's no action required at this point, but I think we need to spend time individually to figure out what it is that would make us comfortable with enforcing our laws. I remember years ago, Peter Benjamin asked the question sort of rhetorically, like, well, what's the point of having all these rules? What's the point of having parking regulations? What's the point of having fines for detonating nuclear explosives? If there's no, we can say we have $100 fine for building a cemetery. I don't think there's a fine for that. I think we're allowed to do that. But we can say that we have that. But if we're not going to actually put teeth to it and allow anybody to enforce it, then there's no point. So I think this is we're just trying to take a step here and finally outline how the town is going to put its money where its mouth is in terms of our rules.
Has anyone here gotten a town ticket before for parking?
No, not me. Okay, so
Can I?
I don't want to keep pushing this off and off and off. It's not time sensitive in the sense that we have anything urgent that needs to be done on this, except to the extent that we don't enforce our code. And so I'd like for this to move forward. I'm not quite sure how to move it forward. Barb, do you have any suggestions about how we can try to make headway on this?
Unfortunately, I really don't. At this point, I'm not really sure what direction I'm receiving and what you all would like me to do. And I think perhaps you just need more time to think about it. I mean, I think that the biggest class of violations, I think, in any municipality are generally going to be property maintenance related, and many of those fall under the county code and ultimately, could be enforced by the county. But I think at this point, I'm not clear whether or not you all, and the session tonight was not intended, I think, to give this direction. But, when I personally looked at the fines assigned to various categories in the town code. There didn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason to them in terms of what might be considered a more severe offense seems to have a lower fine associated with it than some other things that were probably less harmful to the community. But ultimately, those are, a matter of judgment for you all as the elected officials for the town.
Donna, did you want to jump in?
Yes, yes, thank you. Along the same line, I had the same thought as Barb and you, Mayor Welsh. I was wondering who put the laws together, if they were vehemently opposed apparently to plastics and nuclear war at the same time. But I digress. I'm sure there was a really good reason to that. But in addition, I think this does warrant some more thought and maybe even a special meeting, if you will, just to go over whatever feedback we give Barb, if it's either, in writing and then a discussion, or if Barb, synthesizes all that into one memo, or we actually discuss it. I think it makes total sense, because otherwise they're laughable, and we don't want that either. Especially if there are certain provisions that are enforceable by the county that are beyond, maybe at a lower threshold than we have. I'm under the assumption, and Barb, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the county trumps whatever Garrett Park's rules and regs would come up to.
It really depends. My guess would be that there could potentially be some overlap. I haven't had time to really study the county code chapters. There's quite a few of them that obviously we have opted into. And certainly I have some links to at least DHCA's is the county department that oversees property maintenance violations. They did send me links. There's a number of them, which I'd be happy to send to you all. I think some of the things that fall under the town code and we had a recent instance of this within my tenure anyway, where someone had blocked a sidewalk. And town office was getting a number of complaints about that. I think the situation went on for, over 2 weeks. And I think during that time period, the question was posed to me by one of you, well, can't the town just go and remove the obstruction and charge the homeowner? And the simple answer to that question is no, not under the current town code provisions. So those are some of the kind of situations that you may just want to, give some thought to, and how you want to handle situations like that. I would say, in my experience, and I've been at this a long time, as many of you know, I would say most homeowners, if you reach out to them and say, hey, we've been getting some complaint about XYZ, or you may not be aware that the town code requires ABC, I would say probably about 95%, if not more, of the time you get voluntary compliance. Now, depending on, the situation, the most common one that happens, with property maintenance things besides grass is somebody has peeling paint. Well, if you notice that in the middle of December, there's not anything anyone can do within 10 days that's actually going to remedy the problem. That's probably something that would fall under more county code. But in those type of situations, for example, you just try to be reasonable about it. When can the person actually address the problem, and what's a reasonable time frame? Or if someone's in the midst of a serious family crisis, then clearly what you try to do is to work with the party and say, okay, when do you think you could reasonably attend to this? So most of the time it is a matter of voluntary compliance. Unfortunately, that doesn't always occur.
Okay, so that's the Garrett Parkiness could be replaced by Garrett Park, what was the word that you used? Reasonability or something like this.
I think that's generally, Kayla and I've had this conversation. I think being a code enforcement official is probably one of the tougher jobs in local government. And when you find someone who handles that function well, you really try to hang on to that person because it does require not only a knowledge of the applicable laws, but also just the ability to kind of be reasonable and work with people.
I did have something just to respond to Phil's idea about appealing any kind of ticket or, violation or what have you. I think there are some that just I don't think warrant that. So I would just agree with Mayor Welsh's opinion that some don't make sense to have any kind of warrant appeal, and others might, depending on the situation, especially if we're approaching this from a neighborly point of view of talking to them in advance and seeing what's the situation, can we help some way, and the like. So I just want to add that in there.
Thank you. And I've got two questions. One's actually probably pretty quick. I noticed section 112, general administrative, was highlighted. Was there a particular reason for that?
I was waiting for someone to bring that up. I think, as some of you are aware, we've hired a company to kind of go through and digitize the code, but also look for sections that may need to be addressed. So the yellow highlighting on the code that is currently on the town website is indicative of an ordinance that may or may not have been actually resulted in the code being updated. I will say, having, being the person who's working on the project with general code, what ended up happening with section 112, I'm not sure if this is why it was highlighted, there were actually two separate ordinances that were adopted by the town, both referencing section 112 and both dealing with different topics. So I believe the reason that's highlighted in yellow is because the other ordinance also impacted the same section, but since there was already one existing, no one knew what to do with it. So it's kind of a yellow caution, there's a problem here.
Barbara, I was curious, in the past, like what do you mean by digitize the code?
It'll actually be searchable.
Okay.
So we've hired a company. There's two major code companies in the country. One is General Code, one is Muni Code. By far, those are the two companies that people use. So this was a project Andrea had started in terms of researching. I actually entered into the contract. But if you go onto our town website, the code's not really searchable. You can't use terms to kind of pull up different sections. So that's part of what they're doing. They're also, as I kind of alluded to, checking for inconsistencies. So the section 112 that you ask about, Phil, is one of those examples where two different ordinances basically ended up impacting the same section of the code and assigning numbers.
And my second question, hopefully will be fast, is misdemeanor. How do we handle those? Does that mean you call the police, or how is that?
That's a good question. In talking to the town attorney, there are misdemeanors, and so technically they're crimes. I imagine, I believe the mayor, as the chief executive officer, typically would designate someone as an inspector for the purpose of these type of matters. I'm not sure the police would come for some of the things that we have categorized as misdemeanors, but I think there would at least need to be some type of appeal to the state's attorney's office to say that we believe a crime has been committed, and the state's attorney's office would need to determine whether or not they were willing to prosecute. That's my impression, Phil. Once again, I'm not an attorney, but I can certainly ask Ron both that. But I believe we would need to put the state's attorney on notice, since they're the only entity that currently can prosecute those matters.
Okay, thanks.
I'm still kind of at a loss for, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Jerry Lee.
Two things. One, Barb, I think attachment 2, the list of current Montgomery Code chapters that Garrett Park opts into is missing chapter 33B, pesticides, which the town opted into in either 2020 or 2021. I can't remember which year it was. And secondly, I wanted to suggest perhaps we assign a committee to work through, a detailed proposal for how to address some of these things. I like the idea that Phil and Donna talked about of identifying a few cases or provisions that appeals would be applicable for. Parking, for example, I agree would not need an appeal process, but perhaps some others could. And specifically, I will say again, I think the Arboretum Committee would like to weigh in on the provisions as relate to town trees.
I'm at a loss for, I mean, aside from a committee to look at this stuff, I'm not sure, Barb.
I think, Joanna, this might be a case that people need to sort of, kind of think about tonight's discussion and maybe schedule this, since it's not overly time sensitive, maybe bring it back in a month or two and just, see if people have a better feel for where they would like to go at that point.
Okay,
I
so
think it's a lot of information to digest.
So what could we ask council members in the town to consider or to look at so that we can try to move this forward?
I think one would certainly be, what's in attachment one in terms of just taking a look at, once again, this is sort of an abbreviated, list, because technically anything that's in the town code that someone doesn't abide by is technically a violation, which once again, by our code is by default a misdemeanor. But I think certainly looking at the classification of some of these items would be helpful, looking at whether or not individual council members feel that the fine amounts are appropriate, would certainly be useful feedback. In response to kind of the comment Donna made, I suspect what happened with the plastic straws is this was undoubtedly a more recent ordinance that was adopted. It pretty much kind of made its way through all the municipalities. My guess is that since a common municipal infraction is $100, that's sort of what Ron Bolt probably drafted the ordinance and defaulted to that amount, would be my guess. Some of the other items where there are fines listed probably have not, and I'll go out on a limb here and say they probably have not been reviewed to see if everyone's still comfortable with them since the time the ordinance was enacted, putting them into the town code. So I think that would certainly be helpful. I'd be happy to send you all the links to the county code provisions that deal with property maintenance violations, just so people maybe have a better understanding of what those entail. And then I think certainly, Joanna, going back and looking at, some of the issues that were brought up in the ordinance last month that did not get introduced, and see if there's any of those things that people are comfortable with moving forward with, or not comfortable with, just having a definitive answer on those items.
So it sounds like there needs to sort of have homework so that we can try.
That's actually the word I had in mind. I was trying not to use that with my bosses.
Okay, all right, well, let's do that, folks. Let's look at the classification and fines for the different violations, and let's look at what the county rules are, regulations are for some of these things, and let's see if we can move the ball forward. Okay.
I'll quick point of information. Council member Simons was the one who introduced the straw legislation as part of a move by restaurants to try and get rid of single-use straws because they cause harm to wildlife and especially to ocean creatures such as turtles. So that's where that one came from.
Okay.
I do have one other quick question that has to do with the agenda, and that is, did we need to vote or do a resolution for the things that Kelly suggested? Because I know we talked about it, but we never said that we were going to do it. Is that going to be handled later, or should we do a resolution to approve
for the personnel manual?
Yes.
I mean, I think this was just kind of us weighing in on what we thought of the progress, since it isn't there was, she wasn't presenting anything for us to accept, but just, am I on the right track?
Okay.
Yeah, I
Kind of
mean,
like
I
have a
think,
come resolution later, right? After it goes through the
Right.
town attorney.
right, I think obviously she's going to need to finish drafting the manual. I guess we wanted to know whether there were any items that you all objected to. My sense is, as is often the case, and I think this happens very commonly, there seemed to be a consensus that people were supportive of the changes we were proposing to make to the manual. And so I think at this juncture, Kayla will probably move forward with, editing the text to incorporate those items that you all discussed earlier. But I appreciate you bringing that up, Phil. It's always good to have clear direction.
All right, let's move forward, please, because it is 9:46, and let's get some updates. And I'm not suggesting that anybody should not give thorough updates, but we do on rapid fire, that would be pretty great. Councilmember Bennett, what would you like to tell us about Arboretum Committee and the composting program and Strathmore redevelopment and all the other 100 things that you're working on?
All right, rapid fire. The fall planting list is in good development, and notable of that is there will be overcup oaks put in along Strathmore, or I'm sorry, Oxford, near the school to replace the declining willow oaks that were removed. There's a tentative date for the fall tree walk, November 6th at 1 p.m. So please mark your calendars, and there will be advertisements. Regarding the Waverly sidewalk, the committee has been had been working on some proposals in that regard, and they opted at the last meeting to provide broad recommendations to the town office and the town engineer regarding the sidewalk design to best enhance treescape, future plantings, and other issues. Regarding compost, Barb and Kayla are working on development of an RFP to enact the budget item that we put in the 23 budget for $15,000 for a compost program in town, targeting for December consideration. Just wanted to get a sense of the council. We are currently proposing it as a subsidy, meaning that there would be some form of resident contribution, and that could take several forms. The other option the extreme options might be the town pays in full, including to provide the bins, or some form of subsidy, which might be on the low end, just the resident pays for the bins and the town pays for the composting service, or on another end of the spectrum, the subsidy might only cover a partial part of the service, and the resident pays for the bins and some portion of the service, or just some portion of the service. We don't have to get into the details tonight, but just wanted to let you know that's currently the framing that Barb and Kayla are working on, with an assumption that there would be some form of subsidy and some form of resident contribution in the program, and more details to come in the future. All right, no questions, moving on. Regarding the St. Angela Hall development, they are still in the preliminary site plan phase. It has gone through the development review committee, and there are ongoing agency reviews. Don't have a lot of specific information about the content of what agencies are saying back. I think we can expect within the next couple of weeks to see a planning staff report get published, and then a date for a planning board hearing, likely to be mid to late November. Apparently that planning staff report gets published about 10 to 12 days before the hearing. And right now the planning board does not have any agendas posted, or even any meetings clearly scheduled beyond October. So no public information yet about when that will be, but we should keep an eye on that. And my understanding is that the mayor and I have talked about trying to follow up with planning staff about potential sidewalk coordination regarding the potential continuation of the sidewalk in front of the development to extend all the way to Kenilworth and Garrett Park, because we've not yet heard anything from the planning department about that issue. So we want to follow up and find out if that's being discussed. Anything else I should add on that, Joanna? Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, since Councilmember Max isn't here, I'll just give the brief update from our town archivist, Claire McDonald. She's been busy responding to research requests from both the town office and residents, and also has received requests or inquiries about whether people can make donations of materials to the archives. And Claire didn't mention this, but I know she's also working on looking at what contributions the Dick and Peggy Pratt have made to the town of Garrett Park in terms of all the work that they've done over many, many years. And this is sort of in conjunction with an anticipated November miniature ceremony with relation to the grotto property that they are donating to the town. So I think that's one of the things that Claire's also working on, is kind of gathering information about the Pratts. Councilmember Paskowski, historic preservation and land use.
But just real quick, I want to thank you for having that looked into all the contributions the Pratts had done over the years. At times they were kind of treated kind of poorly in recent years, so it's good to hear a lot of the good will be brought out. But historic preservation I can cover first. There was a kind of a roundabout discussion, but one of the big things is trying to figure out when and what topics to do for a future house tour. It was pretty successful, the Victorville tour a couple years ago. So most likely it would be Chevy houses. Committee's trying to figure out like when to do that, because it's a fairly heavier lift than most people might realize to be able to organize all that.
But it's also coming up on a significant anniversary for the Chevy houses.
Yeah, so the first one, our understanding is it was built in 1924, the first batch. So potentially it could be a good alignment for that to do 100 years. And I think Nancy Walls had found or looked back into it, or maybe Chris Keller had noted it, that the last time a tour was done on those, it was the 60-year anniversary. So we'd be kind of following that same vein, which is kind of nice. The other thing we were trying to rekindle was a couple years ago looking into whether or not to make an app, which Kensington had and some other places have, that kind of show historic sites, so people might be able to look at that and kind of read more digitally instead of just the brochure of what's in and around town and how the town came to be. But it's probably fortunate that we didn't do that, because people, I think, just download apps less and less. But so we're kind of looking into what makes sense to maybe have that be more website based, so people might be able to kind of log in and see, what around them might be historic, or maybe some things about the town plan that a lot of people may not know about. Maybe it could even be linking different events, or maybe it's in conjunction with the Arboretum Committee to kind of any notable trees or kind of where you are. So it seems like a pretty fun thing to have for residents in the future, but it's another one that's a pretty big lift to try to figure out how to put all that together, how to keep it updated, how to keep it accurate, so on and so forth. So that's kind of where we are on historic preservation. Land Use Advisory Committee had a meeting, and we're trying to get the ball rolling on figuring out what to do with, especially with ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units. And the one part of it that's probably mostly figured out, Barb's been working with the town attorney on this, trying to figure out like how the town can clarify what parts of the county code it opts into or chooses not to opt into. But sounds like a few years back it was inadvertently trying to guard against short-term rentals, like just of a couple days or a week. It was inadvertently the baby was thrown out with the bathwater, so then it kind of threw out the town's ability to have the county oversee any kind of leasing, including long-term rentals. So looking to correct that, but that should be mostly administrative to be able to figure that out and get that done. The other big question that's kind of been hanging around is county council was really dead set on changing the zoning to be able to allow these accessory dwelling units. And one way to do it is build it in a house. And I've brought this up probably about a half dozen council meetings in the past, so it's been kind of hard. I think one of the things we were discussing is probably hard for residents to really understand what it is until one pops up next door to them. So we're trying to figure out how to guide it in the short term before they proliferate to, make sure that it's in line with kind of the way Garrett Park has been developed and what Garrett Park values, so we don't end up kind of losing that character by these things. But
So trying to be proactive and think ahead as to what trend, what trend line is, where these units are headed, and trying to anticipate them and consider that in advance instead of responding.
Yeah, instead of reactionary, just be proactive about it. We've been trying to noodle this for a while, but it's a tough one to look into. But it's been helpful. Barbara's given us some examples of what other municipalities have done. But really just trying to see, maybe we have a certain limit on the size of a house and utility building in general in Garrett Park. So, does that transfer automatically over to a dwelling unit or not? Or should it be a different ratio? Those kind of things that we looked at. There's already guidance from the county on how far it has to be away from a setback from property lines, but is that something we would just stand pat on what the county requires, or should there be special Garrett Park restrictions over and above that? So those are the sort of things that are being looked at. Also like parking and like it was brought up, like maybe lighting too. So it may be a little bit disconcerting if all of a sudden a lot of exterior lights start popping up in backyards, if say there were multiple of these dwelling units put in the back. And one of the reasons to really be careful with it is it's not super likely it would happen, but it's the limit on the size of them is 1,200 square feet, which is bigger than a lot of houses in this town. And you can't just put 1,200 square feet on any lot. It has to fit within a lot of other ratios. So it can't be more than half the size of your regular house. But if it's on the larger end of lots in town, like a 15,000 square foot lot, you could conceivably put a 1,000 or 1,200 square foot house basically in your backyard, kind of where a garage might be. So that would probably surprise people if 2 or 3 of them showed up on a block. So again, we're just trying to figure out how to make it reasonable to have them be able to be built, because they are potentially useful for bringing in a family member that maybe is aging, or children, or so on and so forth, or just renting it out to people to help your own household. So to be able to not close the door on it, but to do it carefully.
So sort of think about the worst case scenario of what monstrosities or what crazy things could happen, so that we can work backward to find reasonable parameters for what's acceptable.
Yeah, and I think one of the analogies is like George Martin and I've discussed this a couple times. Like it's funny with some houses that get built in town, a fair amount of residents might be calling or asking around, like, how could somebody build something like that? And we look at the ratio of what's allowable, and it's not even close to what the max is. It just may seem large to some people, but it's still within the regulation. So it could be the same thing happening with accessible dwelling unit. It could be something that's very modestly within the bounds, but then it's just a little bit surprising to folks. So.
Barb, can you do the Parks and Open Spaces update?
I was actually not at their last meeting, but I have seen their draft minutes, so I can go off memory. I think one item that they discussed was coming up with a proposed name for the Yendel property. I think, as we alluded to earlier, I believe they settled on Yendel Grove as what they would like to recommend to you all. So I imagine they'll be coming forward formally to suggest that to you. They also, I think, are interested in having a sign put in front of the property at the appropriate time that basically says, let's just say it's Yendell Grove for a moment, Yendell Grove coming soon, something I think that people can get excited about and know that there is going to be something as far as an amenity on the property. They're also discussing, I think the item that came up before you all, I believe it was at your July meeting, about the current dog park property. As you may recall, a resident appeared before you at your meeting in July to propose that maybe some alternative uses of the property, or at least some multi-purpose uses of the property, be considered. I know one of the members of the Parks and Open Spaces Committee put together a community survey that is being circulated among the committee members for possible distribution to get feedback. So I believe those were the major items that they discussed at their meeting.
All right. Councilmember Schultz, you spent some time over at the pool and the aforementioned dog park looking at the cistern.
Yes, so met with, we had Lisa, we had Jack, both from the Pasco, and Barb, and Jason was a big person to discuss the possible what could be done, and to also give him an idea on the type of scope of work we were looking for him to work up, as far as what type of surveys might need to be done, what type of work might need to be done in order to address the sinking in some parts, and the collapsing wall over at the pool side, because we consider the collapsing wall over there to be basically historic, since it's the last remnant of that cistern that was there. So he came up with a couple of ideas, including putting basically a wall behind the wall to help hold up or hold back the earth so it doesn't press up against the back of the wall. Talked about getting it repaired. We talked about possibility of either digging out some or all of the cistern in order to put in some type of backfill, or maybe put a type of slab over the top of it to support it so it'll stop the sinking, and to also look at removing all the blacktop, plus maybe doing some other type of hard surface and or soft surfaces. So he's going to work up some plans and some things for us to look at.
Is it your sense that we could address the crumbling wall and the sinking cistern area on the pool portion of this area, without having to address the dog park area? I mean, can those two things be split so that we don't need to rush a decision about how to renovate, how to fix up the dog park in order to address the problem with the wall and the cistern?
Yeah, it's correct, because basically the dog park side is subsiding, and what he had proposed was that we could have somebody come in and do the pool side of it, and while they were there, they could dig up some of the area subsiding where the dog park is, go down, look, see what's down there to get a better idea as to what might have to be done in the future, and then backfill it and put some gravel over the top, which would buy us a bunch of time until we can figure out what exactly to do with that space.
So that would be sort of a less expensive option than having to rush through and make a decision and pour new asphalt or whatever we're going to do just because we happen to have the equipment there.
Right. It would be basically, the idea is use the equipment that was there just to do an exploration, and then when done with the exploration, backfill it, throw some gravel over the top to keep it safe for a little while until we figure out the long term is. But try and get the pool side fixed, mainly the wall, hopefully before next pool season.
Okay. Chris, I see that you put something in the chat. I'm not quite sure if that was intended for everybody or just one person in particular. I would be delighted to have coffee with you or wine with you, but somehow I doubt that was intended for me, even if I would love it. So just wanted to.
Indeed, I was trying to respond to everyone on one issue and an individual on another issue. I'm still having difficulty hearing Councilmember Schulp, which is an issue you identified early in the meeting. And another council member, the volume level is not the issue, but the quality of the audio is an issue. I'm sort of wondering if the council is going to whether an appropriate town expenditure might be to assure that each council member's audio connection was sufficient for those of us who are just listening in to actually follow. I just as a taxpayer and a resident, I would think that would be a wholly appropriate expenditure of town funds if the town is going to continue with virtual or even hybrid meetings. And I'm sorry I didn't hit everyone on the on that comment.
Donna.
Thank you, and thank you, Chris. I'm glad that the invitation extends to all of us, because otherwise I would have been really jealous. But aside from that, I know what you're saying, and I completely agree. But I have to say, even though also Mayor Welsh commented that she could not hear Phil, I could hear all of the discussion throughout the whole entire meeting. So I've had no issues with any of the sound. So I'm not sure what that was, but I'm very far from being any kind of technology expert in this regard, but just wanted to put it out there that I think there's probably many different reasons that we can't or can't hear some folks, and wanted to apologize if you can't hear me very well either, and just wanted to put that out there. So I'm waiting for the invite, by the way.
Yeah, Barb, can we put this on kind of tickler file and just something to consider that we could look into what would be required to make sure that we all have good equipment to be able to communicate appropriately and thank you. Time is 10:08, which actually, crazy enough, is not that far off from the anticipated adjournment of 9:45, but still, we're going to do better next time. The time is 10:08, and let's adjourn. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Everybody.
Good night.